from around the world have convened essentially an open space between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European time. So people from around the world can come together to share their experiences as we all navigate through this extraordinary pandemic. It's an unprecedented event in human history. It's the first time when virtually everyone everywhere has undergone the same experience. It's put most of us into some kind of lockdown. All of us are engaging in social distancing. Most of us are wearing masks when we go out our front door and into enclosed spaces. And extraordinarily, it's put the whole world in the same conversation of how we deal with a public health crisis that is insidious and is turning out to be ongoing and requiring on the part of the public, our institutions, our governments, vigilance in how we comport ourselves so that we can ensure public safety. Some countries are doing better than others. It's just worth pointing out that the countries like the United States, Russia, China, Brazil, and others that are doing the worst are all governed by men. The 7 countries that have done the best, New Zealand, Iceland, Denmark, Germany, Taiwan, etc., have been headed up by women. It's important that we take advantage of this crisis to think through how we can transform it into an unprecedented opportunity. This is important, as we all know, because scientists are telling us, and have been for many, many years, that we're running out of time. Climate change is spinning out of control. There's an accelerating rate of species extinction, deforestation, water scarcity, and virtually every area on the planet is in some state of despoilation, disrepair, and degradation. And so how at this critical moment we can come together with such clarity of purpose and vision, that's essentially the only question before humanity that's worth contemplating. And that's why Humanity Rising has been convened, not only to allow people to share what's going on as we navigate through, but how we can come together in a way that will enhance our capacity to ensure that the post-pandemic world is more sustainable and resilient and abundant, healthy, and in alignment with natural systems. In April, there was a magnificent decision by the city of Amsterdam to embrace donut economics, which essentially is to put human well-being, not capital, not gross domestic product, not trade, but human well-being at the center of what that city is now going to organize itself around, and within the context of natural systems and constraints. That decision electrified the world, and very soon dozens of other cities were in the process of following suit, the most recent being Copenhagen, which is in the decision pathway to embrace donut economics. And it was around that time that we had the extremely good fortune of coming into an acquaintance with Edward Muller, who is the founder and CEO, president of the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica, who'd been developing donut economics and regenerative economics, generative alternative systems of all kinds through his university, which was founded back in 1994. Someone who's a veteran of the environmental movement and has been doing an extraordinary amount. And he just rose to the occasion And we decided that based on Amsterdam's leadership, we would put together a 7-day program to really look at donut economics, look at these alternative models of finance, business, and economics. And we're now in our 5th day. So we're going to focus today on alternative generative economies. And we'll be exploring specific examples of how change is happening on the ground. So Ed, I'm delighted to introduce you once again, and he will moderate our panel. And I would just say that all of you who are on the Zoom call, if you have questions, if you have comments, just write them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And to the 15,000 of you that are listening through our around 40 of our partners that are live streaming this, I just want to welcome you. Thank you for joining in, and welcome to the program. Ed?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And thank you all of you who are listening throughout the world. So it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're going to have another exciting day. As Jim mentioned, this is our 4th day. I gave an introduction of the planetary condition on the 23rd. Actually, in the chat box, there is a link to that presentation. There has been a lot of demand to have that presentation alone, so the team cut it up, and it's available on the chat, and you'll find it also on the Humanity Rising page. Then we had the donut principles with Kate herself and Andrew Fanning, who did the national donuts, a tremendous work. Then we actually had the examples, as Jim mentioned, with Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Cali, Colombia, and a country initiative, which I'm leading in Costa Rica. Yesterday, we had a beautiful discussion on regenerative economics, economy of the common good, with John Fullerton, with Christian Felber. We had other people on the panel. It was really an amazing one. You should go back and listen to that if you missed it. Today, we have really interesting change-making initiatives, which I'll introduce very, very shortly. Tomorrow we'll be with Wellbeing Economy Alliance, both the alliance itself and then the government part of it, which is another global, really powerful movement or initiative that's has to be presented in a session like this. And the last day on Wednesday, we have 2 new initiatives. One is called Bouncing Beyond, and the name says it. It's bouncing beyond instead of bouncing back to the old system. How can the transformation process and the theory and all of that has been developed very strongly be implemented to help these initiatives actually scale up and allow for the world to transform using the opportunity of the COVID to really come out on the other side with a better world. And we have also GAIN on the last day. It's a global initiative to study the new economic systems that are coming up. So I don't want to prolong my intervention too long today. I will ask Reiki Corden to turn on his camera and tell us about seeds. Seeds is a really powerful new type of cryptocurrency. I'll let Reiki talk about that. But we're actually committed to implementation at large scale in Costa Rica. We're going to be accepting scholarships with seeds. We're going to be paying regenerative initiatives with seeds. So please, Reiki, floor is yours.
Sure. Reading some of these comments in the chat group, y'all are fantastic. I'm loving the energy already happening in there. First, I want a little bit more clarity on the flow here. Is this a 13-minute window that I have, a 3-minute window? Like, how deeply do you want me to get into the seeds?
You have around 20 plus minus minutes, so you can take your time. If you take 30 minutes, it's okay.
we're about to hop on an interesting journey then.
You can take your half hour if you want.
Okay, cool. And then just use the Q&A section if anyone has any questions you want me to answer. Otherwise, I'm just going to hop in some really crazy rabbit holes. So my name is Reiki. I'm a facilitator at Seeds and Haifa. Haifa is an organization that's helping build seeds. Haifa actually comes from the little hairs at the end of the mycelial network. So we take a lot of inspiration from our ecosystems in the natural world about how we can build economies and different types of civilizations that are taking the patterns of nature and weaving them at the core level and the foundational level into how we actually structure civilization. So we've taken that hint from the mycelial network, and what Haifa is, it's a one thing that's going to help things connect. So Haifa's committed to building tools to help our new civilization share resources, communicate at a distance, and reimagine how we actually go about setting up civilization. So one of the first things that Haifa is building right now is called Seeds. So Seeds is not owned by Haifa. Seeds is an economy and a financial system that's owned and governed by the people who are a part of it. So when we look at the crises we're dealing with today, a lot of them are systemic crises, meaning they come from the very foundation of how our economic systems and how our civilizations are set up. So if we don't address these problems, these crises from the very foundation, very roots of where they're coming from, we're not going to address them at all. So understanding that that's the level that we need to actually address these crises with, Seeds comes in to say, here's an alternative economic system with a different way of governing and a different rule set that encourages us to be able to support each other whilst we go about this transition. The transition I'm talking about, I'm kind of all over the place, bear with me, is this transition to what we call a regenerative civilization. So it's a civilization that's regenerative by design. It's what Kate Raworth is constantly talking about, is creating economic systems that are regenerative by design opposed to being degenerative by default, which is the current economic systems that we're dealing with. So what I'm going to take us all on is a little bit of a journey. I'm going to share my screens if I can. Talk a little bit about what Seeds is all about. And if you have any questions, again, please use the Q&A chat box below and we can dive into all of that. All right. So first, Seeds is a cooperative and inherently voluntary financial and economic system. So it's a financial system in which you own a share. So what does that mean? Currently central banks have made trillions of dollars in fiat currency over these last couple of years. Especially with COVID, I think recently it announced that about $6 trillion was made globally in the last few weeks, or last few months rather. That's an enormous sum of money. And to put that into perspective, the UN went out and said that it would cost $50 billion to end world hunger. So we could have ended world hunger hundreds of times over with the amount of money we've made recently. We could reforest all the deserts on our planet and seriously mitigate our climate risks right now and biodiversity loss with anywhere from 200 billion to 300 billion. So we could have done that several times over, but we didn't. So what does it mean when we own a share of our financial system is that we actually get a voice in whether or not that financial system should make money. And if it does make money, then we would actually get a part of that new money being made. And then we also get a voice in being able to direct any new money being created. So you can imagine that if we actually owned our financial system, then humanity could be the ones deciding how we spend that $6 trillion. Not a small group of people who are very blatantly using it for their own self-interest. Further, we could rewire our financial systems to support the regeneration of our planet. So we could have imagined that 2 trillion of that, that might not even be enough, goes towards the direct regeneration of our communities and our ecosystems, and to support reversing the effects that we've caused the last couple millennium of degenerating our environments through civilization. We could start regenerating our environments and making them more biodiverse and more healthy. Furthermore, it's a financial system that's transparent and trustworthy by design. So some of you may be familiar with blockchain and what's happening in that space, but at the end of the day, all blockchain really does is helps make things more trustworthy by making them transparent so that people can actually see what's happening behind the scenes. And that's a big problem within our current financial system. There's a big article that went out a couple of years ago that was talking about how the Pentagon lost over $12 trillion. It's a very interesting article because $12 trillion is an enormous amount of money, and they just couldn't account for it. So if our systems were transparent, trustworthy, and citizens could go and actually track the flows of money, it would be very interesting to see where that $12 trillion ended up. But also we wouldn't be able to have that level of value go, quote, missing if our systems were transparent. And then most importantly, we need a foundational system that is governed by the people, directly by the people. So not using our, representative plutocratic governance systems that we have today. We could have systems that are truly governed by the people. So I know this is a massive concept I just decided to kick us all off on right now. But what SEEDS is really approaching is how do we rewire the foundation of our financial systems? So that's, again, the concept we're starting with here. I see a lot of chats, so I'm going to just check those out real quick. Oh, there's a really good question. How do you see the system being regulated? So that's extremely important that we talk about this, because that's the other really important element that blockchain offers us, is that we can build decentralized systems that are governed directly by the people that, resist regulation, so to speak. So I'm going to use the analogy of a butterfly. So some of you might know this, but when a butterfly goes into the cocoon to start crystallizing itself and becoming a new organism, its immune system actually starts fighting what's called these imaginal cells. These are these new cells that are becoming emergent properties that are wanting to become the butterfly. So they're emerging and they're being actually fought by the caterpillar who's resisting that change taking place. Now with that immune system, if that immune system's successful in fighting these emergent cells and these imaginal cells rather, it will kill the caterpillar and the process of turning into a butterfly will come to an end. But if the imaginal cells can overcome the immune system of the caterpillar, then it can create the butterfly and turn into this new being. So that's kind of what we're seeing today with these new systems coming online. The old systems are fighting against them because that's all they know and those are the tools they're given. So we need to create systems that are not able to be shut down by the prevailing system. That's not, saying anything's right or wrong. It's just a process that those systems that are destroying our planet, destroying communities. Sorry, everyone. I'm a little bit tired. It's my 11 o'clock at night, so I'm staying up a little bit late to do this. So if my brain isn't fully functioning, here's why. But anyway, so our current financial systems are destroying our communities, destroying our planet, concentrating wealth, and giving a very small minority of the population the voice. So given that that's the situation that we're dealing with, we need to create alternatives. And if we expect those alternatives not to get regulated, then we're expecting the wrong event here. So we need to make sure that the systems that we're building cannot be regulated, while at the same time doing our best to make sure that we're following all the laws that are applicable so that we're not causing a mess. But at the same time, we need to make sure that they're resilient against that. So it's a really good question. And that's where, blockchain comes in. I'm not going to give a big diatribe about blockchain or how that works, but if you're really interested in that, just look at the basics of blockchain. But one thing that's really important now that I'm talking about blockchain and how SEEDS is built on a type of blockchain, it's not built on the same types of blockchain that, Bitcoin or Ethereum are built on. So blockchain is a huge ecosystem with hundreds of different adaptations of how to approach decentralized ledgers, essentially. Further to note, blockchain has already gone about 4 generations right now. So if Bitcoin was generation 1, then there's this Ethereum, there's generation 2, now there's other blockchains that are generation 3, 4. So SEEDS is operating on what we call a generation 3 blockchain. So I only mention that because Bitcoin and some other blockchains get a lot of bad rep for being extremely wasteful in how they, one, defend themselves. So they're generating, I think the Bitcoin network uses more electricity than Colombia last time I checked. So a pretty large nation. Second, those type of blockchains also get a lot of bad rep for concentrating wealth. So Bitcoin basically just gives more currency to the ones that already hold currency. So it's really important to separate the concept of Bitcoin versus blockchain. So a lot of the times people hear blockchain, they automatically think Bitcoin. That's not the case. So blockchain is really just a decentralized ledger and a way to be able to set up different networks that cannot be co-opted. But the economics behind how that blockchain operates is going to differ from every single blockchain. Okay. So I'm going to look up one more question and then I'm going to get back to this presentation. How do you deal with the trust issue in blockchain? Ooh, that's a really good one. So trust is what blockchain is all about providing. So to give a quick little story on this, our initial economic systems were gift economies. We grew up in small, tight-knit tribes and family units, and we knew each other, we trusted each other. So when we had more than we needed, we gladly shared it. We went on a harvest, we collected food, we went and shared it with our family. We created some art, we really liked it, we shared it with our friends. So we had gift economies, so we knew everyone and those trust lines were easy. But once our civilization started growing beyond our trust lines, we needed different forms of trust in order to exchange with each other. So this is really where gold and currency got its start, is when trust lines were broken. So when civilization was large enough, or it's too large where trust could be formed in another way. So now people could trust that that gold weighed a certain amount, that it was gold. They could check the property of the gold. They can bite into it and see if it is gold, et cetera, et cetera. So really currency only got its start as being a form of trust exchange between people. So when we're talking about new types of currency, what we can do is we can go straight to trust rather than having to destroy our world searching for gold. So we can pull gold out of the ground, melt it down into pure gold, put it into bar, and then lock it right back under the ground again. So they're going through this really insane process in order to exchange with each other because we're trying to find ways to start trusting. So blockchain gets rid of all that noise and it creates trust because it lets all the players of the system see exactly how it's working. So you no longer have to trust an institution that they're saying it's going to behave a certain way. You can actually go and see for yourself that it is behaving that way. So that's why they call blockchain trustless, because you don't actually need trust because you can see for yourself how it's working. Hopefully that was clear enough. Okay, so I'm going to dive into this a little bit more. Given my time constraint, and there's some really cool things I want to cover, I'm just going to drop into some of the weeds here. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, not the chat. I think there's a Q&A section that's just about questions, and that can help me actually see which questions are open and answered. Okay, so why do we need seeds? Seeds is a different type of currency if there's all these other blockchain currencies out there. So real quickly, we're trying to create a currency that's more stable than the current cryptocurrencies that are very volatile, traditional investments, which are typically going up in value, or national currencies, which are losing value anywhere from 3 to 12%. Okay, so this is our foundation. We say, okay, we're trying to create a currency that's more stable, more dependable, but that can also regenerate our planet and create all these beautiful things that we actually want humanity to be able to do, but we're being hamstringed by our current financial systems. So how this works is that we create stability by when demand goes up, when our economy is growing, we create more currency to meet that new demand. So very simply, we maintain that stability by creating more currency when there's more demand for that currency. And then it's this new currency that we actually get to deliver throughout our economy. So we get to give all the people who are part of seeds part of this new money. So that's as if the central banks of the world, when they created those trillions of dollars, they actually gave some of that money to the people who are part of those civilizations and the systems. You know, some of these financial systems did do that, but in most times it was more of a token gesture rather than a real share of that new money being created. Further, we can give out some of this new money to the organizations that make up that civilization. So what Seeds is creating is the very first better than free payment system, so that you can accept payments, not be charged any fees. But if you're a regenerative organization and you're doing good things in the world, you can actually earn revenue from all the fees that are all the payments that you're taking. So how this looks is that if you're an organization, you're taking a lot of payments, well, you're helping our economy grow. And if you're helping our economy grow, then we're able to create new currency. If we're able to create new currency, we're able to distribute some of that currency, and we're going to give it to those organizations that are participating in this new system. So we have the first better than free financial system. And where this gets really, really interesting is how we decide how much of that new money an organization or a person gets. So within Seeds, we have this concept called contribution. So the more you contribute to that civilization, the system, the more of this new money you can get. So we as a society can start deciding what we value. We can say, you know what, we value healers, and we want healers and communities to be able to go around healing people and just basically be able to get a universal basic income for being able to do that, or for making that happen. So this is what we can start doing. We can start rewiring organizations' incentives. For example, we give new currency based on how regenerative a business is. So there's a set of metrics that we weigh and say that business is being really regenerative. If they are, they can earn more currency. So now we can create an incentive for businesses to start adopting more regenerative practices because they can make more money doing so. And we think this is really important to start aligning our financial incentives with our ecological interests. Because right now our current financial systems are at odds with that. Now, for example, we have this concept in our current systems that's called planned obsolescence. And this is the practice of designing items to break down. Because if businesses only make money at the point of sale, then they don't really have an interest for you to use that one item forever. They would much rather you use that one item for a week and then have to buy another one and another one and another one, right? But what we can do with the Internet of Things coming on board and everyone already tracking how much we're using our items, we can imagine we can create a different type of economic system that's tracking how much an item is being used and then reward that manufacturer based on the item actually getting used. So this simple change can completely rewire how our economic systems are set up, because now manufacturers have an incentive to build something that's going to last a really long time because it's going to get used more. And if it's used more, they can make more revenue off of it. They now have an incentive to set up sharing economies. Right now, there's no incentive for a manufacturer to have people sharing their item. That's just more items. That's less items that they're able to sell. But again, now if they're making revenue off that item being used, they have an incentive to have more people use one item. So now they want to build it to last, they want to build it to be shared and used, and they want to make sure it can be repaired really easily so it doesn't have very much downtime, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all the ways that we can evolve how our economic systems actually behave and how our incentive systems are rewarding behaviors when we start creating a different type of foundation for our economic systems to rest on top of. So that's what Seeds, ultimately is providing, is a new type of foundation for us to rewire how we set up economic systems. And it starts off with this way that wants to reward people for participating. Because that's the other thing that I think really needs to take place in order for new systems to get adoption, is they need to be 10 times better than what we currently have. Most of cryptocurrency didn't get adoption because it's not better to use than cash. Cash is already completely anonymous, it's free to spend, and there's instantaneous transaction times. So how do we make a currency that's better than cash? So this is one of the other questions that Seeds had on its mind, is how do we actually reward people for spending this currency so that it becomes better than cash to spend? So again, with the same incentives that organizations have, now people have that same model. So people are getting rewarded based on how much they're contributing. One of the ways is how many times are they actually exchanging with it? How much are they using this currency? That's a contribution. How much are they participating in governance? So now we want to reward people for being able to participate in the governance of the systems that you're in. If you're adding your wisdom to those systems, if you're helping them evolve, if they're helping them improve, we want to pay the people who are showing up to these systems to do that. So that's just some of the ways that the people of the system can earn revenue. Another way is we give out revenue to bioregions. So this is what we consider local within the Seeds context. And this is what Edward Mueller was talking about at the beginning of this, is we're setting up bioregions all across Central America and all across the world at this point. I think there's north of 20 projects, last time I checked, starting up in bioregions. So if this is something anyone listening to this call is interested in doing, is setting up your local community as a bioregion, we could start giving you a grant and seeds for you to start distributing amongst your local community for regenerative actions or funding regenerative projects, interest-free loans for regenerative businesses, et cetera, et cetera. How a bioregion, which is a local community, spends the grant it gets is up to that bioregion. So the members of that bioregion actually come together and we give them tools, which I'll show off right here. Actually, that's a whole other conversation. If you're interested in this a little bit more, I'll show you the decentralized governance tools that we're playing with. There's a ton of videos online that go over this as well that we can follow you up with. But essentially, we're giving local communities tools for them to do decentralized governance, which is essentially they're getting some seeds and then they get to decide collectively how those seeds are spent, how that revenue is being used. So this is our way of being able to replace how local governance actually operate. And then finally, there's just one more bucket that seeds go to, and that's the global community. and they're using decentralized governance to figure out how to spend those funds. So long story short, this is like, what if our financial systems gave us a direct voice in how that money was spent? And then we got to decide, well, that local community should get some funds. And then the members of that local community got to decide directly how that money was spent. So this is basically rewiring our financial systems to be directly governed by all the people who are part of it, which is really important. Okay, I'm going to go back to some of the questions now.
Reiki, can you go to full screen so people can see your slides?
Oh, that would have been a really good idea. Yeah, let me do that. So our world is governed by violence. How do you plan to combat thug forces in our world? That's a really good question. So Seeds is voluntary by design. And what we believe we're stepping into is a world that is much more voluntary, so that people are going to have a choice in what type of economic systems or governance systems they want to be a part of. And if they don't like how those systems are operating, they should be able to leave almost instantly. And what's going to happen with those systems is they can no longer use force and violence to coerce people to stay in those systems if they can leave. So that completely rewires how the designers of these systems have to think. They're no longer thinking like, okay, we can use force and violence because we have a monopoly on that to coerce people to do what we want. Now they got to think, well, we have a system that if we want them to continue being part of this system, we're going to have to treat them very well. So it completely changes the incentive structures of the designers of these systems. And that's also why it's really important that these are built entirely on decentralized systems from the infrastructure ground all the way up, so that they cannot be co-opted by the thug, in quotes, forces of our world. So it's a really important question, but if I didn't fully answer that, feel free to ask it again. If one premise is that the more you give, the more you get, how do you control for people who have more seeds simply getting more seeds? Does not simply lead to haves being valued more than the not haves. So how do we avoid the concentration of wealth just happening again? A really, really important question. This is just showing you a screenshot of this, but let me bring up the whole thing. Because I'll show you real time how this works. So Seeds uses this concept of percentiles to do its distribution, where in other systems, it's more linear. So for example, in our current financial system, the more money you have, the more interest you can earn. So the more money you have, the more money you get. That cycle feeds back on itself. And obviously we're getting the concentration of wealth that we're seeing today. Let me open up this app real quick. And it's not too different with a lot of crypto economic systems. Bitcoin, for example, the more money you have, the more miners you can buy. The more miners you have, the more coins you get, et cetera, and it concentrates that wealth again. And there's these proof of stake systems, again, for those who are familiar with these. And essentially that is like, how much money do you literally have? Like proof of stake is like, how much of this currency do you have? So it's like the purest form of an oligarchy or a plutocracy, which is, again, governance by the wealthy. And then, again, the more stake you have, the more of the new rewards you're going to get. And again, we're stuck in this concentrating wealth loop. So what we're trying to address here and see is distributing the new currency out in a completely different way. We're actually using percentile-based distribution. So now if you own 50% of the network, which isn't actually possible, but let's pretend it is, if you have 50% of the contributions, you're in the 99th percentile, right next to the second person in line who might have 2%. So now we've reduced the degrees of inequality down to just 99 degrees of separation, rather than the infinite levels of separation that we see in our societies today. This isn't perfect, but it's a really beautiful place to start, where there's still incentives to join, because if you break it down to just 1 degree of separation, then we get into all of the problems that people talk about, what they assume communism is all about, which is this completely getting rid of the will to achieve or move up. And it's not actually fair in how it evaluates people, because one person could have their entire life dependent on Seeds and be using it every day and contributing a lot, while another person could just have used the network one time to buy local groceries with. So we need to have a way of quantifying different levels of contribution and rewarding them fairly. So we believe the first step is doing this percentile distribution. But as we get going, we can actually reduce those levels of inequality. Maybe first we're using percentiles, but then we actually just break it down into deciles. So there's only 10 degrees of separation now. And what's really cool about this is that since we're giving local communities across the globe Seeds to be able to fund their communities, we actually reduce global inequality through this percentile mechanism. So I can actually show you that. Because this is a really, really important part. Because I believe it's one of the main crises facing humanity right now. I can't find it, and that's just gonna be a distraction. So hold on, I'll go right back to this. One of the main crises facing humanity is our glaring inequality. And that's inequality within systems, but also global inequality. So SEEDS is determined that if we're creating a new financial system, it has to address inequality, but it needs to do it in stages. Because if there's a system that's talking about redistribution or revolution, they get fought very aggressively. And that's, you know, I think it's a false paradigm where we're coming up with an us versus them, where it's like the 99% versus the 1%. But what SEEDS likes to think of it as, or at least what I like to think of it as, is that it's more like humanity versus the systems that we're born into. And if these systems are really going to get the level of adoption that we need them to, they need to involve all of humanity. So not segregate one section of the population because they just happen to be born wealthy, but to recognize that they were also born into these systems and that they need to come along for this ride as well for it to be that fully gripping and thriving change that we need it to be. So this is all to say that we want to create systems that are enticing for all people to be able to join and that are still throughout their life, decentralizing value more, distributing value more equitably, and reducing inequality as these systems continue. Which is really important. All right, look up another question. How could SEEDS be integrated with donut economics? Ooh, okay, this is gonna be a fun one. So we're talking about designing a different type of financial system here, which is really a different way of distributing value and resources within a system. So one of the ways that global donut economics makes a lot of sense is in how we're doing sense making. So this is one of the other inspirations for a new type of economic model is how biological systems operate. So I'm not going to dive into this one too much. There's some long presentations that really get into this. But what we're saying is we're going to need different sensory organs in order to understand how we maintain homeostasis within our ecosystems. So donut economics is a perfect example of that because it's taking in a lot of different very valuable metrics with what it means to have a thriving society, whether that's a community, a city, a bioregion, a continent, etc. So now local communities or anyone can actually use this donut economic model to be able to sense what is working and what's not working about how they're interacting with their systems and then drive value towards financing those things. So what I mean by that is going back to the biological concept here. This might be a deep concept, but I'm going to go with it anyway, is organs have different types of currencies, so to speak, in order to communicate within themselves. So there's different hormones that we release. There's different nerves that are used to communicate within organs that aren't the same way that organs use to communicate within themselves or how the whole body is used to communicate. So what I mean by this is that we can, within our communities, sense that something is lacking. We could say, you know, education is lacking within our community. So we're going to create a different type of currency that's just designed for rewarding people to improve their education. So in a very simple form, we might create a currency that we call, you know, education token that can only be redeemed by people who are, you know, putting on retreats or personal development coaches or people helping other people read or whatever, anything in the field of education. So then we can give a form of universal basic income out throughout our community that's just, it's only able to be spent on education. But if you have the whole community then deciding this, then you can have a universal basic income, but one that's actually targeted to address the social ailments that are, you know, causing harm to that community. Again, I know that this is not my best presentation. It's a little late for me, so bear with me. So we could do that with any one of the metrics that are being tracked here. So we can see, you know, equality is out of whack, then we can reduce the level of inequality within our system by just reducing the percentile distribution wealth, right? Unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really great use for donut economics, is using it as a sensing tool for how we're going to deliver value and resources throughout our economy. And there's other models that we can use to do that as well. So this is what I was talking about with currency diversity is within bioregions, within businesses, within villages, whatever context you're looking at, you can have different currencies for exchanging value within that system than the currencies used for exchanging value between systems. So, within systems, you could do really interesting things like that health and personal development token concept I was telling you about. You could do mutual credit within systems much easier than you can do it between systems. There's another concept altogether, which we're playing with. We call this the gratitude token. And essentially, it's a token that everyone gets an equal amount at the beginning of each cycle. And this token only means something once you give it to somebody else. So holding on to it, hoarding it means nothing. It creates value once you actually share it with someone. And if you don't share it by the end of that cycle, you lose it and you get a new batch of these gratitude tokens. So what we're doing is we're creating a culture where people are actually looking for things to be grateful for. They're looking to give this currency to people and to express that gratitude, which I think maps over a little bit more to the reality of how gratitude works, like giving somebody else a hug or saying thank you. It feels good for both parties. So how do we start creating currencies that start looking like that? And those things are things we can start exploring on a local community level. But when we start engaging in wider communities and communities where there is a lot less trust, then we could start having currencies that look more like cash, like Bitcoin, et cetera, or equity in our organizations, or seeds, which is meant to look like fiat cash or things like that. So this is where we could start having a diversity of currencies in order to do value exchange, which is also really important. Most of you, I'm going to make an assumption here, are familiar with permaculture and biological systems. And what creates a resilient, healthy system is diversity. Soil is healthy if there's more diversity in that soil. So our ecosystems are more healthy if there's more diversity. Well, that's the same thing with our financial systems. Right now, we have very fragile financial systems because they're all dependent on a single currency or a handful of currencies, which is not enough diversity to maintain that resilience needed in economic shocks and these crazy times we're living through right now. So in order to have that resiliency, we need more diversity. And this is where we start stepping into that. So Seeds is already creating the foundation for these new currencies to be created. It's starting off with this one currency. And I feel like this is an important point to make, especially given the audience I'm talking to, because I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with local currencies, community currencies, and that whole effort that's been made for many, many years. And one of those things is that currencies are networks, and networks gain more value when there's more members of the network. A very basic example of this is a telephone network. When there's one telephone, there's zero value at all. Where there's two telephones, it just increased the value of the entire network several fold over. When there's three phones on that, then both of those previous phones get more value than the last, et cetera, et cetera. So the more phones that join the network, the more valuable that network is. Well, it's the same thing with our currencies. And right now, here's a couple examples of some of the top cryptocurrencies. National currencies are in here too. But essentially what we're saying is the more members that join that network, the more value each additional person who's part of that network brings to it. So what we're seeing here is in the height of Bitcoin's life, there was about $225,000 that every daily active user of Bitcoin brought to that network. I think that's really high overinflated, as national currencies are anywhere from $3,000 to $45,000. So what we're saying with this though, and why Seeds is a little bit different than community currencies, is community currencies weren't fully leveraging this network effect. There was already currencies that had that network effect, like the dollar or the euro or whatever community they were operating in, that they were competing against. So they're competing against currencies that were fully leveraging that network effect while choosing to hamstring themselves by artificially limiting the community that could participate with that currency. So what Seeds is trying to do with a global currency is fully capitalize on that network effect and fully gain the value of each successive user joining the network, because this is value that we can then derive towards regenerating our planet. Using Bitcoin again as an example, last year, so in 2019, Bitcoin generated $7 billion worth of Bitcoin. 3.5 billion of that went to pay electricity fees. But this is $7 billion for a currency that hardly anyone uses that could have been going towards, setting up regenerative businesses, replanting native forests, making our waters drinkable again, et cetera, et cetera. So we really want to fully leverage this network effect because that's more value we can drive towards this regenerative renaissance. Another thing is that one way of looking at this lifetime value of a person, as organizations might look at the lifetime value of a new customer. And what that basically tells them is how much money can they spend on marketing to convince someone to join their product or buy their tools. But what this says for us is how much money can we use to subsidize someone joining the system? So if every new daily active user of Seeds can bring $3,000 to $45,000 worth of value to that network, then that network is now able to justify spending that amount, acquiring that person. But instead of just acquiring them and thinking like, how can we convert them? We can think of this much more holistically. And we can say, we can spend this money to subsidize their transition into this new civilization. You know, currently people aren't thinking about creating a new civilization because they're so caught up in the 9 to 5 and having to work just to survive that they don't have the luxury to be exploring the new tools that are coming online right now, or taking the time to find their purpose, or understanding this new paradigm of the new things that are taking place right now because they're so busy just making it through the day to day. But if we could subsidize them, actually attending a retreat, taking 6 months off, and we could pay them to do that, if we could pay people to take 6 months out of their life to then figure out what these new tools are, how they could participate in this new civilization, how they could be a part of it, that'd be such a more beautiful way of spending this, you know, $3,000 to $45,000 of value that they could bring to that network. And where this idea really comes from is there's a book called The Nordic Secret, and it talks about how the Nordic countries at the turn of the centuries, they basically did just this. So when they were going from monarchies to the democratic republics that they are today, they're saying, well, how do we encourage people, or how do we, if we're going to give up control to the people, how do we make sure that they're actually going to be making good decisions? So what they did is they financed retreats all across the Nordic countries and paid people to become self-authoring. So they also had the foresight to say, hey, if people are going to be making decisions, let's make sure that they're wise enough to do that, and give them the space to be able to do that. And as we saw, the Nordic countries went from like really behind agrarian countries at the turn of the century up to some of the most prosperous, industrious, and well-off countries today. And this book kind of walks through the process and attributes a lot of it to that. So either way, a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but I think that's a really beautiful thing that Seeds is able to do. And we are starting to do this with a couple of pilots. We're going to put on some retreats where we pay people to go to a retreat. Because the idea here is if a financial system is really in its most divine form meant to deliver value and resources to the things that are going to make civilization better, well, having people go through the process of becoming more whole themselves, figuring out their purpose, aligning to their passion, that's something that's going to make civilization better. We could be paying for that to happen. Yep, okay. I didn't make my slides big again. Sorry about that. I'm pulling up the questions again.
Maybe we can start wrapping up and we can come back to questions in the panel discussion. Yep.
All right. So at the end of the day, let me just really quick touch on this. So where Seeds is at today is we've been in this process for a little over 3.5 years. There's a lot of planning and game theory and economic design that goes into creating the foundations of Seeds, as you might tell. We've also launched a couple applications. So one we call a passport. It's like stepping into a new type of civilization is how we think of it. So you can find that. It's called the Seeds Passport in both the app stores, or we have the Seeds Lite Wallet, which is just another application, but it's just very basic and straightforward. It's a way of sending and receiving transactions, and it's very simple. So these are both of the ways to actually engage with Seeds. So I'm talking about this really complex system, but we needed to make it as simple as possible for people to be able to step into it. So we've designed it just as an app that's very much just like the regular banking apps that you guys are using today. But by stepping into this app, you're actually stepping into a different type of economic model. So you can send money, receive money, just like you would with PayPal. But instead of fees, actually it's without fees. Okay. If you go to seedslibrary.com, there's a whole lot of articles and videos on there that dive into a lot more about everything that's happening here. So there's a lot to unpack. I was kind of all over the place here again, so yeah. Bear with me there. But if you want to dive into a lot more of what's happening here, go to Seeds Library and you can see everything that's happening. Or go to joinseeds.com, and that's just the basic website that you can get a download to the wallet and start playing around with some of the apps. Okay, so that's me closing it up there. And now maybe, do I do Q&A?
No, we'll go to the other panelists, and then at the end we have a discussion. Thank you. I think I think everybody agrees, and you can look at the comments later in the chat. People are amazed, as I was. And if you can do this at 11 o'clock at night, congratulations. Yeah, I know you're on the other side of the world. Thanks for that. I will pass it on to Manuel Vega. Manolo is a good friend, and he's running a new financing system for Mexico and Latin America. So please, Manuel, take the floor.
Ed, I don't see Manuel on the screen.
Oops, I think
He's not in the meeting, Jim. You're right.
Somehow he got disconnected. Maybe we should have you go to Marilyn.
Yes, let's go to Marilyn. While I call Manuel. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Marilyn, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. Right, I just am very inspired by what you shared. It's going to be hard for me to concentrate on what I have to share, but I think I see lots of links, so no doubt we will have a conversation afterwards. So I have a few slides to share, so I'm going to share my screen and just speak to what I think is the message that I have to offer today. Several of you may have seen me on prior Humanity Rising sessions. The first one way back in June, I was talking about the energetics of the city. And then about 10 days ago, I was looking at thriving human habitats. So today, to bring in a way to bridge how I have been looking at cities as human hives, as living systems. So I think that's something I have in common with Reiki, looking at that picture of the human body. I have come to believe that cities are that human being writ large. I've called my session today Meta Scaffolding for Co-creating Generative and Regenerative Cities. So I want to offer something that is also a beyond. We talked about beyond earlier, and really share how the integral city as a living system, I call it the human hive, like the beehive is for honeybees. The integral city is the collective habitat for the human species. And this first slide is just a link to my website, which I also invite you to just go and delve into, because there is more information than I can possibly give today or in 3 or 4 sessions. When I have my slides put up, you'll also find these links to many of the ways that you can gain access to the information that I'll share here. And I point even to the Amsterdam Integral City of the Year 2019. So having donut economics featuring Amsterdam is really a beautiful synchronicity. And I think it's not just a synchronicity, it's, as Jim has been saying, it's an experience, an eventuality that the time has come for. So what I'm offering today is kind of a way to put some of the principles of the donut into practices and maps and processes. And as Reiki just also referred to the Nordic secret, the way that we approach these with the integral city, it could be any of the kinds of generative or regenerative approaches to economics that are being tried out around the world. And yesterday we did hear several of the proposals and initiatives that are being taken place in the Scandinavian countries. And we have been going to many of the countries around the Baltic, Finland and Norway and Estonia, and also Russia, which is out there at the other end of the Baltic. So I have been looking at the little booklet that they've created for the Amsterdam City Donut. And one of the things that I noticed very quickly was that they had an integral perspective. That is, they're looking at both the local and the global, as well as the social and the ecological. So the way that they have parsed the donut through these lenses is very familiar territory to the integral city. They've also asked at the end of that booklet some really good questions. What will be the benefits of the city pursuing socially, ecologically, locally, and globally an economic system like this? What tensions might arise? What changes are needed? How can the city's diverse network of change makers create synergy between their existing initiatives and collaborate? And what kinds of changes are needed within the city's own organization in order to address interlinkages of social and ecological issues and solutions? These are just the kinds of burning questions that Integral City engages often. When I was looking through their summary of creating thriving cities and their transformative approaches, I noticed in their tools and methods that they had integral theory. And I went, yes, that's why I recognized the patterns that they were creating. But I want to talk not just about integral theory, but integral practice. As Jim's remarked to me, I've been looking at the city as a living system through an integral lens for 2 decades now. And one of the first things that I created was a set of 12 intelligences that I think a city needs in order to be able to have an integral evolutionary view. Those intelligences became part of what I call a GPS. So if we had time today, we could spend some time looking at the 12 intelligences that are there. But I think that what I will concentrate on are what I would be calling navigating intelligences, and refer also to inquiry and meshworking intelligences. So there is not only on the website a lot of information that you can get about the ways that Integral City explores these practices and actually sets up a framework that is meta. So the meta framework is actually holding a human system that is complex, adaptive, and living. I'm also glad to hear this currency can also be eco-regional, because I can't think of an integral city without its context in its eco-region. An integral city is emergent, but it's also a way of looking at the whole. So it's a holistic view of the city. We have also the aspects that it's holographic and fractal. So if you look at any part of the city, you can actually discern the rest of the city. And you can also look at the different scales of human systems in the city. I was very fascinated when I read Donut Economics to find Kate Raworth's journey through economics as a discourse, as an academic discipline, and how she was seeking, isn't there a better way for us to think about living systems than the old supply-demand curves? And I was looking for the same thing when I started to look at cities. My entry into the discourse of city comes through living human systems. And I started working with individual development, leadership development, teams, then organizations, and then sectors and communities. And somewhere along that trajectory, I noticed that the patterns are very similar. And I realized, we're looking at fractal patterns here. It's not accidental that at different scales, human systems keep showing the same patterns. So I also think of, as I just mentioned, that cities have their intelligences, and there is ways that we can engage the whole city in an intelligent way. I heard Reiki mention and had one of his slides the word holon. Well, I think a city is not just a single monadic holon, but it's a social holon. So all those different scales are going on simultaneously in the city. And that's what makes it so dynamic and really hard to track. A city, I believe, has a purpose. Most of the cities that we are looking at these days don't know yet what their purpose is. They're now, maybe in this time of reflection, coming to maybe an implicit understanding. A few cities do know what their purpose is, and they've been serving the planet for those purposes. But I think that we will find that cities can be connected in these kinds of mycelial networks that Reiki also was referring to, and that we will find the purposes of different cities are serving the well-being of Gaia in very powerful ways. Cities also have meshworks. So this is more like the mycelial network than the simply pure description of one-to-one networks, where we see self-organizing going on along with structuring. So I think of cities as having two operating systems at least, one that is self-organizing and another which is structuring. As I mentioned, they're multi-scalar and they're naturally networked. I've been looking at trying to create artificial networks, if you will, but really I'm seeing now, especially during this quieted time in the last few months, many ways that we have found to naturally network with one another. The final point I would make about the qualities of an integral city is that they're evolutionary. They do not stay the same. They're dynamic, not only because of the internal dynamics of what makes up the city, but they have to be evolutionary because the contexts in which they are in are also evolving. In addition to those 3 books that I've written, I also had the privilege to curate a book in the last several months of this year, the first quarter of this year, called Urban Hub 20, Accelerating City Change in a VUCA World. And here I was able to bring together a number of integrally informed practitioners who are all serving the city for different purposes, from coaching to organizational development, to team development, to looking at city planning. And I imagined, since most of us are distributed all around the world, what would happen if we came together and were able to support a single city? And could we make a change? Could we accelerate the change? I'll come back to this at the end of my presentation and just let you know a little bit more about how that actually turned into becoming a meshwork. I told Edward that when I was going to do this session that I would go to another source of my understanding about the city as a living system, about its role as what I call the human hive. So I've learned from the bees, Apis mellifera, they've been around for 100 million years, that they have their own economy. Maybe we could call it a bee economy. And when I first learned about the bees, I was fascinated to learn not only do they have a language, they do their famous waggle dance and communicate with each other, they also have a hive goal. And the goal is actually in terms of energy. They must produce in a wild hive something like 20 kilograms of honey a year, or they can't survive. But in order to do that, the bees have discovered that they have 4 roles that are needed in the hive. First of all, they have their foragers, who are called conformity enforcers. And they are actually working together to go and gather the nectar and the pollen from the sources in their bioregion. They also have diversity generators, and diversity generators are different than the foragers who go to all the same places. Their job is to go and find flowers and energy sources in different locations within the bioregion. Most of the hive is the conformity enforcers, or the foragers, about 90%. Maybe about 5% are diversity generators, and a much smaller percent are resource allocators who help the whole hive discover, along with the 4th role, the inner judges, are we getting to the goal that we've set to achieve? Are we working towards what it is that we need to do in order to survive and even to be resilient in our beehives? When I looked and sat with these roles for a long time, thinking about the city as a living system, it came to me that these 4 roles can be translated into human systems. And so I think of these 4 roles in terms of the systems that are what I call the 4+1 voices of the human hive. So the foragers the producers are citizens. The resource allocators are civic managers. The diversity generators are business innovators. And our resource allocators our resource allocators are civic managers, and I think our inner judges, our hive mind, are being played by civil society. I also pointed out when I was looking at the beehive that they have an extra role that is played, what Howard Bloom calls intergroup tournaments. And I think those intergroup tournaments in terms of the city hive, the human hive, are played by other cities. So there you have my translation of the 4 roles from the beehive into the human hive. Now, the bees have a very special way of managing their economy that brings them resilience and actually contributes to their bioregion and the earth as a whole. I would say that bees do what I call place care. They have this internal goal and sustainability, but they also place make, because as they're collecting the pollen and the nectar, they're pollinating their ecoregion. And in fact, they're creating energy for next year. They're gathering their energy for this year and creating the conditions for energy to be regenerated for next year. That is what brings them resilience along with their sustainability. Now, it's very interesting when you look at the honeybee, and there's been an immense amount of research. I'm always coming across new volumes, and inevitably we'll read them. I just read a book that's been around for a while, but it's called Honeybee Democracy, and we can't go into that these days today, but this is how they even make decisions within the hive about moving on to create a whole new hive when they swarm. In order to do this kind of democracy, though, in order to collect and produce their honey, bees connect with each other every 24 hours in the hive. There's about 50,000 bees in a hive, so imagine a small city. And we know from research and tracers that every bee will have connected with every other bee in that hive within a 24-hour period. So the bees have actually discovered something that I think is integral to an integral city, to a human hive, and that is what I call the master code of care. They care for the individual. In our case, it would be the person. They care for the whole hive, for others, for people. They care for their place, their hive. They care for the ecoregion in which they're located. And by doing that, they're caring for the planet. I believe this master code of care is actually going to become what I would say is not only the source of our natural economy, but also the center for our governance as we discover newly how to govern ourselves in cities and bioregions and ecoregions. So with the 4 voices of the human hive, the 4+1 voices, and our master code, it's also possible to see how we can create something like a meta-organ. Somebody else I listen to these days a lot is Charles Eisenstein, and he talks about Gaia having organs. So humans, it's James Lovelock who says humans are Gaia's reflective organs. So as reflective organs, we must actually be involved and communicating with all the other organs on Earth. We also connect, if humans are Gaia's reflective organs, I think of cities themselves as being the organ, as our organizations being her organelles within the organ, and us as individuals are the cells within those organelles organ. So we have these fractal principles and fractal patterns again that turn out into and relate to our integral city voices. We've talked often in the last 67 days here in Humanity Arising about heart intelligence. So I don't think it's accidental that we have this master code of care. It is a way of looking at heart intelligence. And from an economic perspective, I would say it's even how I would interpret the economics of happiness. We say that in the master code of care, we care for self so that we can care for others, so that we can care for our places, so all together we can care for our planet. If we set that out as a set of ratios. I think that's one thing that the donut or the Nordic secret is going to reveal, that there are ways that we can actually measure this care. And those measurements will be both quantitative, as we're used to gathering data, and they will be qualitative as we're used to telling stories. So with when we look at all the cities in not only an ecoregion, but a continental region like Europe, we have a meta-organ, and we can start to see the beginning of really what is possibly a superorganism that is serving Gaia in the very early stages of what she needs, what she's calling forth from us as her reflective organ. So one of the basics of health in a system that I learned very on, I think I probably learned this one from Meg Wheatley. If you want to improve the health of a system, connect it to more of itself. And so if you want to improve the economic health of a city, then I think you need to connect it to the four voices. I'm just going to quickly show a few of the practices and tools that we use when we're doing that in a city. When a city is relatively small, and I've worked in small cities like Abbotsford, where I was in Canada for 25 years, small city in Oklahoma called Durant, we can work with the whole city. When we're working with Amsterdam or London or Edinburgh, we need to really look at the neighborhoods and look for the kinds of patterns that show up in those neighborhoods and find out how to mesh them together. Many people ask me, how do you do the work? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can bring representatives of those four voices together, and we can make iterative engagements with them. So I invite the four voices to come as thought leaders and sit down in a dialogue circle. I invite citizens to come and let us listen to their four voices, and then also policymakers. And I say the policymakers in the last of this triad because they need to know as policymakers what thought leaders and citizens would like them to do as policymakers. And then we need to clear the blocks away from what policymakers can implement as policy. So if we had more time, I'd share with you the integral maps that I've found shapeshift from one to another. And if some of you saw the earlier session I did on thriving human habitats, I have this in a nice animation. But I just want to put this out to you, as these are all scaffolds for us to bring the circles of care together and allow us to see how cities can grow, how consciousness can expand, how we can reach out and actually even see in the four quadrants of the bio, psycho, cultural, social aspects of the city, how they may be out of balance, and therefore where we might put our efforts and resources in order to bring them back into balance. I am so delighted to see people like Reiki and then Manolo and others on Humanity Rising, because I said I've been doing this for about 2 decades now. And here's a map from very early on from Cascadia. So here's where one of those donut cities even came into my early metrics. I compared Vancouver and Seattle and Portland, looking at their value sets through the spiral dynamics frame. And this was helping us to actually make strategic decisions and design well for effective impact in those cities. I saw that Reiki had also this little map on his slide set, and this comes from my colleague Sean Esbjørn Hargens, who's created the meta-integral map of these wisdoms in the four quadrants that allow us to see different kinds of impact. He studied over 200 sources of capitals and brought and identified within these quadrants 10 types. So not just financial capital, but health, human, manufactured, natural, cultural, social, knowledge, psychological, and spiritual capital. And he also delves into our ways of knowing each other and the types of data, both subjective and intersubjective, as well as objective and interobjective, and giving us 4 types of bottom line: profit, planet, purpose, and people. So I will leave you with just coming back to one of the beautiful emergences from curating the book of the Urban Hub 20. And I realized that when I got all of these submissions for that book, that I would curate it through the Master Code of Care. And when we finished looking at how each of those different experts brought in their expressions, we asked a design question. And this is a design question that a mesh worker would ask, somebody who wants to bring together the best of self-organizing systems and structuring systems, and ask, how do we work together in service to the well-being of Gaia? And what groups of people, for what purpose, where do we need to do that work? So that would be my last place that I will leave you in what I have to share today. And I look forward to your questions, and I leave now space for Manolo to share.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was really exciting, deep. Biomimicry is really pushing forward finally, way beyond what Gaudí could imagine. Yeah, we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to give it right straight away to Manolo. I think he's now back with us. So Manolo, please take the floor.
Thank you, Edward. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Perfecto. Sorry about before, but I lost my internet connection, and precisely at the moment you were calling on me. Well, definitely it's been a great, interesting ride the last 4 or 5 days. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Edward, for the invitation. Marilyn, Ricky, great presentations, quite innovative. I don't have the pleasure, haven't had the pleasure of meeting you personally, Marilyn, nor you, Ricky, but I hope that pretty soon we can make it. I'm going to take the audience to a different type of ride. I'm going to share a little bit my story, my journey of the last 4 to 5 years that have been quite important to me, and how do I get to where I am today. And I think it's also an example of how each one of us that want to have a better world can work out of where we are, close to our families, close to our cities and our communities, and how we can activate change. I mean, we don't have to go very far, but it's just a matter of paying attention, or what is your call, or what's your social call, and try to activate it. No. So 2 days ago in these webinars, we had Jim Fullerton, who, by the way, is the person that introduced me to Edward. He's the head of Capital Institute and also head of the Regenerative Communities Network, who convened in the state of Michoacan in Mexico last year, and that's where we met and had the opportunity to be part of this great group. I studied economics, and I really was not meant to study economics. I wanted to study architecture. When I told my father that I wanted to study architecture, he told me that I should reconsider it because it was going to be hard for me to make a living and be able to sustain a family. And obviously, when I was 17 or 18, that was kind of a shock to me. I mean, why should I pay attention to not doing what my passion was calling and do something else? But that's when I really started to question our systems and our economic models. But in any event, I went into studying economics. I spent 4 years studying economics, which helped me a lot in my profession. But it was I was not paying attention to the social calling that I had inside me. So after going through the 4 years of economics, I decided that in order to be successful, I needed to study an MBA. So I went to Canada, did an MBA. After doing the MBA and returning to Mexico, I did sort of the usual that was expected of someone like me in our society and in the sort of social background that I had. And I went into banking. I spent a couple of years doing corporate banking. Then I went into a brokerage firm and I did corporate finance. Then I went to investment management and I worked for 2 large investment management organizations, 2 big multinational asset managers, one in the US and one in Europe. And at this time, obviously, I got married, I had children, and my children had children. And when my first grandchild was born, I said, what have I been doing for the past 30 years? I said, I haven't paid attention to my inner self. I haven't paid attention to my heart. And I do have to, I felt like my heart had been shut down and I didn't feel alive. And I said, I have to do something. And I could do something that could be, or can satisfy my social calling. And at that time, I decided I wanted to do something else. Turns out that I was invited to become at that time, the CEO of the Nature Conservancy for Mexico and Central America. And I started to discover what real life was all about. And I got to learn about my country and our wonderful natural resources. And most importantly, I learned about our people, those indigenous groups in different parts of Mexico that have been the guardians of many, many sanctuaries and wonderful places. And also I discovered how, because of the way capitalism or the extractive capitalism works, how those natural resources were being depleted in a voracious and greedy way. So it was a very interesting ride, but I had to find out how could I put into work or my networks and what I have learned in finance and investment management, but and put it into the good of others and sort of work towards the common good. And at that time, I knew that I needed to learn about social finance. And I was lucky to find out about RSF social finance in San Francisco. And I went and did the fellowship in the Integrated Capital Institute of RSF, where I learned about social finance and how to come up with some innovative products towards being able to provide both financial and non-financial resources to social entrepreneurs in order to achieve those projects that are needed by our society, where we can combine social, economic, and ecological successful projects. So at that time, I decided that what was needed, at least in my country, and where I could do something, was to come up with was to come up and launch a triple impact fund. And in doing so, and coming back to Mexico and finding who I was able to do this, I found 2 very, very smart, young social entrepreneurs and social investors that were in the process of also launching a triple impact fund. And to my luck, they invited me to become their partner. And the next slides that I'm going to show you show the organization that they had been building for 7 years and how we're in the process of trying to achieve something quite interesting in Mexico. So allow me to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Perfecto. Thank you very much. Let me just put it in slide presentations. Give me a second. Is this better?
Perfect, Manolo.
Okay, great. Well, I am a partner at Co-Capital de Impacto.
You're back to the non-presentation.
Excuse me?
You moved out of the presentation.
I moved out of the presentation.
Well, you don't have the full screen preview.
I apologize. Give me a second.
But it's good. We can see it.
Yeah, I don't know what did I do. I apologize. Can you see it now? Now you can see the presentation fully?
It's not on presentation mode. It's on the working mode.
Wow.
But we can see it enough. It's big enough. You can leave it like that.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, we are a group of organizations that that work collaboratively to build a more sustainable country. My two partners started about 8 years ago with an NGO, and through their own wealth, they started to fund an incubating organizations, about 12 organizations, and I'll show you which organizations they incubated, accelerated more than 800 impact entrepreneurs, certified 50 B corporations, and raised more than $15 million of capital. We did that through a company we call Coplataforma, and give me a second. And basically, some of the companies that we brought down to Mexico were companies like Disruptivo, which basically is a company that creates and spreads content for social entrepreneurs. We also brought down to Mexico Whole Price, Make Sense, Conovo, Social Lab, B System, SVX, Propeller, and Kaya. Because what we wanted to do was to promote the development of the social entrepreneur ecosystem in Mexico, no? And we thought it was quite important to really bring this type of corporations so that we could promote as many projects as possible in order to really strengthen the ecosystem, no? So the way we did it was to create Coplataforma in 2012. Once these organizations were already working and they had their own management and they were contributing to this development of this ecosystem, and we already had sort of a pipeline of social entrepreneur projects, we thought that the moment had come for us to be able to start our own fund management company and be able to start channeling that capital that was needed in order to continue developing this ecosystem. And for us, where we saw the big important change was to, as we were in the process of launching this first fund that we launched last year, was to invite wealthy Mexican families that had been accustomed or used to investing in the traditional ways, in the traditional investment funds, was to really invite them to participate with us in the funds so that they could really align their values and align that mission and purposes, especially those that are brought by the new generations that are inheriting those assets of these families. And to our surprise, and thanks to my partners who are in their late 30s, early 40s, we have been able to meet with a lot of second and third generation wealthy members of families in Mexico to really align their values and invest with us as partners in this fund. And because we do believe that it is thanks to this wealth of these families to really be able to fund these projects that will bring those benefits to our country. I guess that I know that we're running a short time, but I think that I will leave it there and maybe just go through, maybe allow the audience to maybe ask some questions for all of us, Edward, if that's okay.
Sure. I think, thank you, Manolo. As you have all noticed, I wanted to have one on-the-ground experience that is actually allowing bioregional development through a different channel of resources, kind of inverting the flow from everybody to the most rich and wealthy, and inverting that flow to actually feed back into the Gaia system. So thank you, Manuel. What I'll do now is I'll pass on to, I think all of you panelists can switch on your cameras and your mics. And I'd like to give you each about 2 to 3 minutes for a round of comments, and then we can see there are some questions out there that have to be answered. So Reiki and Marilyn. And maybe we start with Reiki. Do you want to go ahead since you presented first? I'm not sure he's, okay. Marilyn, go ahead and let's see when Reiki.
Sure. Well, I'm very curious about Manolo's full story. I would love to hear more about the investors and how you've come to, it sounds like, a new stage in your experience in setting up impact investment. Of course, I was really delighted and surprised at the kind of resonance between Reiki's presentation and mine. As I said there, it's still new for me to be in a group of people where integral isn't a strange word, where biomimicry is possible to be talked about, where we see the synchronicities that arise when we've been maybe called by the same purpose. So I'm also curious because I didn't confess that like Manolo, I am not an economist either. I'm an accountant, amongst other things. So I originally started to look at indicators and use the different qualitative and quantitative perspectives, the lenses that are talked about in the donut economics, to realize all of a sudden that we could have many different metrics that would speak to well-being, speak to aliveness. And so it's not lost on me what some of the audience has been saying, well, maybe seeds is the pollen and the nectar for the economics of the integral city. Yes, it could well be, but I wonder whether you could use seeds in the impact investing that Manolo is talking about. So I'm starting to be kind of a mycelial web connector here. So that's my comments for right now.
Thank you. Reiki, you want to have a 2 or 3 minute wrap up?
Sure. Yeah, my mouse died, so I had to run and go grab another one. Marilyn, that was beautiful. Integral cities, I love it. In fact, what Haifa has been building is tools for organizations to govern themselves in a decentralized way, create new currencies, create equity concepts, etc. But that same tool we're actually fitting for bioregions to use, villages to use, communities to use. So cities could actually have their own. So a city could have its own form of governance, its own decision-making, its own currency, its own way of connecting with each other and all of it. I think that's super important and really beautiful. So yes, I would love to support you in that, and everything Haifa and Seeds can do to like help that spread and give people the tools they need to do that. We're all about it. Manuel, too, also at that investment impact fund, we're doing a lot of things on the Seeds Haifa world around that we'd love to support you with. You know, one of the things, especially in some of these hardest hit countries right now, I mean, countries that are dependent on tourism are just getting decimated at this particular point. They're used to an influx of new currency coming into their economies that they're not getting anymore. And that's causing currency liquidity and crises and currency shortage crisis, which means that there's still people wanting to do stuff. There's just not money there to facilitate it. So it's causing this really depressing situation. Costa Rica is getting hit exceptionally hard right now. So is Mexico. And anyway, what we can do with Seeds is we can bring currency into that economy. So we can have an investor say back a community for, let's say, $1 million worth of their local currency. And then what we can do with Seeds is then mirror that with 1.1 million worth of seeds that then go out to funnel into the community. And then as people continue to use Seeds, we could actually reduce the reserve ratio between that local currency and Seeds. So essentially, if an investor wants to do a local stimulus of $1 million or whatever currency, they can get 1.1 million worth of stimulus in that economy. And then as trust grows in Seeds, we could step up to 1.2 million, 1.3 million, and we can keep increasing that as seeds start circulating and being that alternative currency. So that means the economic impact of $1 million can be made tenfold with using an alternative currency that facilitates it. So these are just interesting tools that governments have used in the past in times of depression. Local communities have done this, entire nations have done this, where when there's been a global depression or an economic depression, they've just created new scripts and new types of currencies to help facilitate that transition. And that's what Seeds can do in those environments too. Really think that's great. Also, there's one other part on that investment fund, Manuel, and anyone else looking to invest is, you know, Haifa is part of we call it a collaboratory, which is just a bunch of organizations that have come together to form an alliance that can then be an investment vehicle that we can invest in a startup ecosystem of impact projects. Because investors, they don't like risk, and we want to reduce that risk. So instead of an investor investing in one impact startup, they get to invest in 150 different startups. And then these startups are all actually working together and harmonizing to make each other more effective and supporting each other. So we create this whole ecosystem of startups all working together for systemic change. And then investors get to invest in that whole network of startups, which is really powerful. So it's a couple of things. If you're an investor looking to invest in things, invest in change, we're trying to make that process more rewarding, less risky. Yeah, so that's kind of my two biggest takeaways of how I'd love to play and create with you more.
Manolo, I think this is also extremely interesting for your fund. If you can match it up with Seeds and spread the impact. I wouldn't waste any time. I would just hop on and organize it quickly. And that's part of what these sessions are about, actually bringing people in touch with each other and knowing what's out there. There's so much happening, but there's so many isolated initiatives. If we want to really shift forward, we need to bring people together. But go ahead, Manolo, give us a few minutes wrap up. We actually still have about 20 minutes time, 15. So just, we can discuss this further.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, fortunately, we met some of Ricky's colleagues about 2 months ago, and we already having conversations, see how we can do something on a collaborative way. You know, what I believe it's very interesting, what has been happening in these 4 months of the pandemic. It's become so obvious that we all need to move into a more collaborative mood, no? You know, it's I mean, we're seeing more and more young entrepreneurs in Mexico that are looking for funds in order to carry on their projects. And I think that making what it's been challenging to us is, all these families that are willing to really try something different and sort of leave mainstream finance and leave, these big investment management companies and their funds and start investing small quantities of the wealth into these projects. It's a matter of building these relationships that are needed, no? So maybe one question for Ricky is, how have you worked, Ricky, with some of these big foundations or maybe some of the wealthy families that are doing something with us? How do you move like in this innovative or disruptive way? And how do you create or build this trust and this relationship that needs to be taking place, especially with these families that have been investing in the traditional ways in the past? How do you build that trust and to build that relationship going forward?
Yeah, I can take that question. I think we're in a really beautiful situation because those families holding so much wealth, especially the second and third generation wealth holders, they've had a lot of time and a lot of really direct, deep, and can't think of the word for it. Basically, a deep understanding of how broken our current financial and economic systems are. A lot of them know how that system works. They know how deep it goes, how dark it is, how cruel it is. They understand it. So starting out from that point with their understanding that that system's broken and we need a new one, most of them know that. But they under this paradigm where it's the best thing we've got, so we just got to stick with it. But once you actually show them that an alternative could be created, that the system doesn't have to end in revolution and collapse, which is typically the cycle of how these things go, which do not work out well for the 1%. They're not wanting that. They're just as nervous. They're spending billions of dollars on up-armored safety, fortresses and underground bunkers and all these things. So they're nervous too, and they want a beautiful and sustainable transition. They want a living planet for their children and grandchildren too. So I think they're definitely allies in this movement where we can connect with them and help them see that there's a better system that could be just as rewarding for them and not leave them out of the picture as well.
Thank you, Ricky.
Ricky, you have several questions for you specifically in the Q&A. I don't know if you want to address them.
Sure. Maybe you can just read some off that you feel like are the ones that should be responded to.
There are a lot of people that are saying they got into seeds, but they don't know how to move forward. Maybe you can explain about the help line you have in Telegram.
Yes, so we have two communities. One's in Telegram, the other one's in Discord. I'm going to share the links right now into this chat if you're here. So here's where the community's having constant dialogue, working with each other, and asking questions, getting help moving forward in that way. I sent it to you privately, let me send it to everyone. But mostly Seeds is just getting started. So we've just launched several of these applications where people can actually start using Seeds and playing with it. And this is just starting right now. So the best way to get involved is get an invite from someone who's already part of it. It's not an elitist thing. It's more preventing bots because every person who becomes part of the system gets some value of the system. And we want to make sure that's not being abused by people with malintent. So that's why we have an invite system. So get an invite, get some of that currency and start building networks in your communities. Again, right now we're dealing with a global depression. And a depression, again, is just when there's not enough money to go around. So we can reverse that depression. We can have thriving communities if we're just using a different currency. I mean, it sounds like magic, and it literally is magic, but our current systems are using that magic for nefarious purposes. We can use that same magic to finance our renaissance and our transition that we're going through. So if you want to help run some projects in your community, if you want to get a grant in Seeds and set up a local community garden, that's happening all across the globe right now. I think there's like 12 different projects like that. So if you even want support from them and how they're working with their project, That's great. If you have a business, like let's bring that into seeds and start dealing direct in seeds, because this is how we like stop using the currencies that are driving and controlling the old system. Like when we use that money, we're saying yes to that system. When we agree to their rules and the rules of the structures that aren't serving humanity, we're saying yes to that. That's how we vote. You know, a lot of people say vote with your money as if it's just how you spend your dollars, but it also means vote with which currencies you're using. And when you're using those national currencies, you're saying yes to, you know, increasing inequality. You're saying yes to financing wars. You're saying yes to spending 80% of humanity's collective wealth, degenerating our planet, subsidizing fossil fuel use, when we should be subsidizing regenerative energy, not degenerative energy, right? So our current financial systems are doing the exact opposite thing, and we can't keep supporting those systems. So that's the biggest thing I think anyone listening to this can do is, you know, take those steps into supporting the new systems that are coming forward right now.
There's several questions about the trust issue and where the resistance is. And then also there's several questions about how the feds or the central banks will react to seeds. So trust, the resistance from the traditional system, and then the reactions of central banks and feds and so on.
Yeah, they all sound like they're a pretty aligned thread. I have this vision that was given to me, and it's a vision of a abusive father being approached by their children, and the children standing up and saying, "Dad, you can't do this anymore. We love you, but you need help, and we're here to support you in getting that help. You know, you were abused when you were a kid. That's all you know. You're angry, you're scared, and you hurt mom on accident. We're sorry." That's kind of how I hope, you know, this vision came to me in a time where I was sitting with this question, you know, how are the elites and the powerful going to respond? Well, I'm hoping it's a lot like that situation where they're presented with an alternative where they no longer have to continue causing the harm that they're causing because they don't want to, at least I want to believe they don't want to. So I believe if they're really showed a system that is as impactful as we can make it, that is demonstrating that it's creating a healthier world, I'm hoping they would want to support it, knowing that the alternative is collapse. So my hope is that it's actually supported. If it's not supported, the backup plan is that it can't be shut down. That's what blockchain's all about. You know, if Bitcoin could have been shut down, it would have been shut down 10 years ago. It can't be shut down, so it wasn't shut down. So it just had to be accepted as something that exists. And that's exactly the way I think we need to go about this renaissance, is designing and building something that cannot be co-opted. That's one, to defend against the current systems, but it's also to build resilient systems that cannot be co-opted again. So we're not just building new tools for a new wealthy elite to abuse people with, but we need to build tools that cannot be co-opted by any group of people. And that's what blockchain and this decentralized renaissance is all about, is how do we build the infrastructure to support these. But that's only layer one, is having that infrastructure that is resilient against those attacks is the first step. But the second step is then how do we make it economically resilient? But moreover, like how do we actually make this renaissance serve humanity and regenerate our economies and do better things for the world? So that's where it really gets interesting in all this. So that comes with the trust bit. Is blockchain's a deep hole to get down, but at the end of the day, you trust it because you can actually go and look literally everything up. You can look up every account, how much money's in that account, where that money's gone. If voting's taking place, you get to see exactly where the votes went, who was able to vote, how it all worked. So it's a system that's so transparent and so honest that everything is visible, then that's where it gets its trust, because people can see how it's working and how it's operating.
Yeah, I think the uniqueness is that the way these decisions are made, where to invest, is a collaborative effort. It's not one individual, and there is no one individual that owns the network. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to do, a decentralized organization where everybody that goes up into the participatory process has a voice. So it's actually taking the chance to participate in the governance, and we should all take part in participating in the governance of our lives, and not just voting every 4 years and then have somebody go off with our votes and doing whatever he wants with his friends. So I think this could be also the basis for a new democracy, a global democracy, a new way of having local governance be empowered, and having central governments which have become so catastrophic all over the world. I mean, it's a mafia that took over for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the people. And that's what this present from nature has brought us, this virus, waking us up that what we built was completely wrong. So I think this is not only about seeds and funding, it's actually, for me, a very viable model for going beyond the funding part and going to the social governance part on the long run. I think that is what we're trying to convene over these days, that there are already alternatives out there. We just have to start collaborating more and building a new system together, as Buck Fuller said. So yes, Marilyn or Manolo, you want to have a few final words?
Well, thank you. I was thinking as you were talking about the blockchain and what you just said, Edward, it sounds an awful lot like honeybee democracy, because it's pretty amazing how they do actually have individual votes and have a hive mind, and the kind of transparency and accountability that you're talking about with seeds. I've long thought there should be regional currencies. And in fact, I live in Findhorn, as you might have noticed from my name, and we have a local currency called ECOS. And so if you've contributed into that, then you get all kinds of benefits from doing that. I'd love to have a chat with you, Reiki, about how do you transition from a local currency into seeds, because I see possibilities for that too. And the other thing that reminds me about the relationships that I developed when I was the chair of the Amsterdam Community Foundation, it's so critical to understand the well-being of the city, the community, through the relationships, and how legacies like what Manolo is talking about allow people to actually translate their passions as an investment into not just what's going on and needed in the community today, but tomorrow for the next generation. So I think it's not just about governance, it's about legacy of our species. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Manolo.
Yes, well, obviously, thank you, Edward. I think this, well, what Humanity Rising has put together is impressive. I think that, you know, pushing these collaborative efforts and, you know, having, you know, people on their 60s like me and young guys like Ricky, I mean, obviously works, and we should push in that direction. And I would say that what it's really working with us, with these families that finally have decided to try, you know, investing in a different way, is it's building on the relationships, you know, that exist. I think that has happened in the past is that we have become so obsessed with prices and transactions, you know, sort of distracts from what is important. So we have to maybe work on these basics that we need as humans, no, and reconnect in the correct ways. I think that, I mean, products like seeds, I think that will help us also enable those type of relationships and forget about the money that we're used to.
Yes. Okay, well, Jim had an emergency call. He had to drop out, so I want to do the closing. I really appreciate today's panel. I mean, it just adds and adds and adds to what has been building up. And I'm really happy the three of you could give your time to share with all the audience that's here. It is time for change. And one thing we cannot do is bounce back to the old system. This opportunity we have is unique. If we don't take it, we'll collapse anyway. We'll go into a real dark rabbit hole, as Reiki mentioned. We're getting to tipping points politically, not only climate change. I mean, We're in a political tipping point right now globally. We're in a social tipping point. We're in a point where division is happening. Even my country, which we are peaceful, we got rid of our army in 1948. And now we're seeing a polarization of opinions and a tremendous fight on our networks, on our Facebook and social media. It's just showing that humanity is requiring a transition. Now, the big question is, and what we have to start really putting into action is, how do we accelerate this transition? And I think here we've heard 3 examples of how to do it. I'm just like crazy trying to think of how we can join all these efforts. And actually one of the strong initiatives, it's this project I mentioned, Bouncing Beyond, is actually trying to play that role in facilitating, using all the expertise in the transformation knowledge and experience, the 3 horizons, all these other methodologies that are out there that many of us don't use on our daily. We don't have access, we don't understand them. So how can we actually all collaborate to this transitioning to a better world? So thank you, the 3 of you, really. And tomorrow we have Wellbeing Economy Alliance. I am very proud to be on their global council. This is a very powerful organization that's coming up. A lot of people are supporting it. We'll be also hearing of WeGov, the government side of it, with Catherine Trebek. We see countries like New Zealand already working on a budget that's not related to GDP. And then day after tomorrow, don't miss the Bouncing Beyond and the GAIN initiatives. And then, I mean, Humanity Rising is going to keep on, and we're actually talking about doing a 2nd round later on in September, something like that, and bringing some of you guys back, or all of you if you want to, and just to show how much we have progressed in these couple of months that are critical. So thank you, and thank you all of those who are listening to us. And thank you, Jim, for putting this together with all your team in Humanity Rising and Ubuntu University. From the University for International Cooperation, which I lead. This is exactly what we're doing. This is our life. So it's not only a short presentation, it's actually what we're engaged in full time. And I have a young child and I have a really small grandchild, and it's our duty to do this. We are not inheriting what we should be inheriting, and we actually borrowed and destroyed what we borrowed. So if we want to give back, we need to fix what we borrowed and hand it back in a correct state. And that's what we're all trying to do. So thank you for coming together. And I do hope that the linkages stay on and we start really joining efforts at a global level. We just need to get to that chasm, going beyond the early adopters into a full adoption process. And that's what we're trying to do, actually join and move forward. So thank you all. Thank you all, our attendees, and see you tomorrow. Take care.